The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor hummed a tune of sterile anxiety. Inside an operating room, Olivia Hayes was fighting for her life and the life of her unborn child. In the waiting room, her husband, Noah, should have been pacing, praying, waiting. But Noah wasn't there. As his wife lay unconscious, he walked out of the hospital, got into his car with Olivia's own sister Chloe, and vanished. For hours his family thought the worst had happened, a tragic accident, a violent crime. But the truth discovered on a desolate road miles away was infinitely more cruel. The antiseptic smell of the maternity ward at St. Jude's Medical Center was supposed to be comforting a scent associated with new life and happy endings. But for Olivia Hayes, it smelled of fear. At 36 weeks pregnant, what had started as a routine checkup that Tuesday morning had spiraled into a nightmare of high blood pressure readings, worried glances between doctors, and the urgent, terrifying diagnosis of severe preeclampsia. Now she was being prepped for an emergency C-section. "Everything's going to be fine," Liv, her husband Noah, whispered, his hand enclosing hers. His palm was clammy, his grip a little too tight. "The doctors here are the best. In a few hours we'll be meeting our son." Olivia tried to smile, but her lips trembled. She looked at Noah's face, searching for the calm reassurance she so desperately needed. He was handsome in that classic, dependable way. Strong jaw, earnest blue eyes, sandy blonde hair that he was constantly pushing out of his face. He was the man she had loved for 7 years, the man she'd chosen to build a life with, to be the father of her child. But today, his earnest eyes seemed shifty, darting from her face to the clock on the wall, then to the door. "I'm scared, Noah," she confessed, her voice a fragile whisper. "Don't be. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." He leaned in and kissed her forehead, a gesture that felt more perfunctory than passionate. Standing near the window, pretending to be absorbed by the view of the parking lot, was Olivia's younger sister Chloe. At 26, Chloe was the vibrant, restless counterpoint to Olivia's calm and settled nature. Where Olivia was serene, Chloe was electric. Her dark hair was cut in a sharp, stylish bob that framed a face of pixie-like features. She had a habit of biting her lip when she was nervous, and she was doing it now. "He's right," Liv Chloe said, turning from the window. She forced a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're the strongest person I know. You've got this. We'll be right here waiting for you." The "we" hung in the air. For the last few months, it had felt more and more like Noah and Chloe. Chloe had practically moved into their guest room, citing the need to help Olivia through the difficult final trimester. Olivia had been grateful at first. The pregnancy had been hard on her, and Noah was often working late at his architecture firm. Chloe cooked, she cleaned, she ran errands. She was the perfect doting sister. But recently, Olivia had noticed small, unsettling things. A shared glance between Noah and Chloe over the dinner table that lasted a second too long. The way Noah's laughter sounded different, lighter when he was joking with Chloe. The time she'd walked into the living room to find them sitting close on the sofa, a comfortable silence between them that felt more intimate than platonic. She had dismissed it all as the paranoia of a hormonal, exhausted pregnant woman. It was her sister. It was her husband. She loved them and they loved her. To think otherwise was absurd, insulting even. A nurse, a kind-faced woman named Patricia, came in with a consent form. "Mr. Hayes, we're ready to take Olivia back now. You and her sister can wait in the surgical waiting area on the 3rd floor. The doctor will come find you as soon as the procedure is over. It should take about 90 minutes, give or take." Noah nodded his face, pale. "Okay, thank you." They wheeled Olivia's gurney toward the double doors of the operating suite. She locked eyes with Noah one last time. "I love you," she mouthed. He nodded again, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. "I'll see you soon," he said. The words felt hollow. As the doors swung shut behind her, the last thing Olivia saw was her husband and her sister standing side by side under the harsh fluorescent lights, two figures perfectly framed in the shrinking rectangle of the doorway. They didn't look at her. They were looking at each other. In the waiting room on the 3rd floor, the air was thick with a universal anxiety. Families huddled together, speaking in hushed tones, their faces etched with worry. Noah and Chloe chose 2 chairs in a corner, away from the others. The faux leather seats were cold and stiff. For 10 minutes they sat in silence. Noah tapped his foot relentlessly on the linoleum floor. Chloe scrolled through her phone, though her eyes weren't focused on the screen. Finally, Noah stood up, his movements abrupt. "I can't do this. I need some air. I feel like I'm going to be sick." Chloe immediately stood as well. "I'll come with you." "No, you should stay here. In case they come out early." "Don't be silly," Chloe said, her voice low and insistent. "You look like you're about to pass out. I'm not letting you go alone." She placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of support that looked to any casual observer like sisterly concern. He looked down at her hand, then into her eyes. A silent, complex conversation passed between them. He gave a short, jerky nod. "Okay." Just for a few minutes. They walked out of the waiting room, their footsteps echoing in the quiet corridor. They didn't take the elevator down to the main entrance. Instead, they took the stairs, their descent quick and purposeful. They bypassed the bustling lobby, exiting through a side door that led to the multi-level parking garage. The air in the garage was cool and smelled of gasoline and damp concrete. Noah's dark blue Ford Explorer was parked on the 2nd level in Section B. He clicked the remote, and the car beeped its lights, flashing in the gloom. They got in, Noah in the driver's seat, Chloe in the passenger's. He didn't start the engine immediately. He just sat there, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in ragged bursts. "We can't do this, Chloe," he breathed, his voice cracking. "She's in there on a table. Our son is about to be born. This is insane." Chloe turned to him, her face set with a fierce determination that Olivia had never seen. "And what's the alternative?" "Noah, go back upstairs and pretend. For the next 18 years. You said it yourself. You feel like you're suffocating. I feel it too. We can't live a lie. Not anymore." She reached over and took his face in her hands. "This is the hardest part. Just this. Getting away. Once we're gone, it'll be better. For us. And for her too, in the long run. She deserves someone who can love her completely. And that's not you. Not anymore." Her words were a soothing poison. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. The image of Olivia's trusting, frightened face flashed in his mind, and he shoved it away. He replaced it with a fantasy, a new life, a clean slate, a world with just him and Chloe, free from the weight of responsibility and the quiet disappointment he saw in Olivia's eyes every time he failed to be the man she thought he was. "What about the baby?" he whispered, the question a last desperate grasp at the conscience he was about to abandon. Chloe's expression hardened for a fraction of a second. "She has her parents. She's not alone. The baby will be fine." She dropped her hands and buckled her seatbelt. "We have to go, Noah. Now, before we lose our nerve." He took one last, shuddering breath. He looked in the rearview mirror at his own pale, haunted face. The man staring back was a stranger, a coward, a monster. He turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, a definitive damning sound in the quiet garage. Without a backward glance at the hospital that held his wife and newborn son, Noah Hayes put the car in drive and sped toward the exit, leaving his old life in a cloud of exhaust fumes. The world swam back into focus slowly, a blurry watercolor painting, gradually gaining its edges. Olivia's first sensation was a dull, persistent ache along her abdomen. Her second was thirst. Her tongue felt thick and dry, a piece of felt in her mouth. Her third and most urgent was a question. "My baby?" She croaked, her voice raspy. A figure in blue scrubs swam into her vision. It was Patricia, the kind-faced nurse. "He's here, sweetie. He's beautiful. A little small, 6 pounds and 2 ounces, but he's got a strong set of lungs on him. He's in the NICU, just as a precaution. But he's doing great." Relief washed over Olivia, so potent it was dizzying. A son. He was safe. Tears pricked her eyes. "Can I see him soon?" Patricia promised. "We need to let you rest a little more first. You went through a lot." "But you were amazing." Olivia's head lolled on the pillow. She was in a private recovery room. The light was dim, and the relentless beeping of monitors was a steady, rhythmic presence. The immense weight that had been pressing on her ribs for months was gone. She was no longer pregnant. She was a mother. The thought was staggering. "Noah," she asked, her eyes scanning the room. "Is he with the baby?" Patricia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm not sure, honey. I haven't seen him. Let me go and check for you." Olivia nodded her mind, still foggy from the anesthesia. Of course he'd be with their son. He would be down in the NICU, his face pressed against the glass of the incubator, marveling at the tiny human they had created. She pictured him, his blue eyes filled with awe, and a real smile finally lit up her face. But Patricia didn't come back. Another nurse came in to check her vitals. An hour bled into 2. The fog in Olivia's head began to clear, replaced by a growing unease. She pressed the call button. "Could you please find my husband?" she asked the new nurse. "His name is Noah Hayes. He should be in the NICU." The nurse gave her a placating smile. "I'll send someone to look for him, dear." More time passed. Olivia felt a frantic energy begin to build beneath her exhaustion. This wasn't right. Noah wouldn't just leave her here alone. He had promised. "I'm not going anywhere." His words echoed in her mind, a mocking refrain. Where was he? Where was Chloe? Just as true, panic began to set in. The door to her room opened. But it wasn't Noah. It was her parents, Robert and Susan Mitchell. Her father's face, usually so jovial, was a mask of grim concern. Her mother's eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. "Dad, what's going on?" Olivia tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her abdomen made her gasp and fall back against the pillows. "Easy, sweetie," Susan said, rushing to her side and taking her hand. Her mother's hand was cold. "Don't try to move." "Where's Noah?" Olivia demanded, her voice rising. "And Chloe? Did something happen? Was there an accident?" The most terrible scenarios began to play out in her head. A car crash, an attack. Robert cleared his throat, his gaze fixed on a point on the wall just above Olivia's head. "We don't know, Liv. We can't reach either of them. Their phones are going straight to voicemail." Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. "What do you mean? You don't know they were here?" "In the waiting room. The nurse at the desk said they left for some fresh air. Hours ago," Susan said, her voice trembling. "And never came back. We've been calling and calling. Nothing." The room felt suddenly airless. Olivia stared at her parents, her mind refusing to process their words. It made no sense. Noah wouldn't leave. Chloe wouldn't leave. Not without a word. Not while she was in surgery. His car, Olivia said, her mind grasping for a logical explanation. Check the parking garage. Maybe they just went to the car to get something, and their phones died. It sounded feeble even to her own ears. Robert's face fell. We did, honey. We just came from there. His Explorer is gone. The blood drained from Olivia's face. Gone. The car was gone. Noah was gone. Chloe was gone. The small unsettling moments from the past few months coalesced into a single monstrous thought, a suspicion so vile she couldn't give it voice. But her mother, seeing the look on her face, seemed to understand. No, Olivia Susan said firmly, though her own conviction wavered. Don't even think it. Something must have happened to them. Robert has already called the police. The police? The word was alien in this context. The police were for car accidents, for burglaries, for violent crimes. Not for a husband and sister who had inexplicably vanished from a hospital waiting room. An officer from the local precinct arrived about 30 minutes later, a young, earnest cop named Officer Kent. He took their statements in Olivia's room, his presence feeling like a gross intrusion into their private nightmare. Olivia recounted the morning, her voice flat and robotic. She described Noah and Chloe, what they were wearing, the make and model of the car. She left out her private, ugly suspicions. Voicing them felt like a betrayal in itself, a final abandonment of faith. Most likely, Officer Kent said, trying to be reassuring, there's a simple explanation. A dead battery, a family emergency they had to rush off to. They'll turn up. But Olivia knew he was wrong. There was no family emergency she wouldn't know about. And Noah was meticulous about his car. The battery wouldn't be dead. Every logical explanation crumbled, leaving only the illogical, the unthinkable. Her parents stayed with her, their forced optimism a thin veil over their own terror. Robert made calls to Noah's firm, to friends, to Chloe's roommate, growing more agitated with each conversation. No one had seen them. No one had heard from them. It was as if, after walking out of that waiting room, they had simply ceased to exist. Later that evening, a doctor finally cleared Olivia to be wheeled down to the NICU. As she was pushed through the quiet, dim hallways, the hospital no longer felt like a place of healing. It felt like the scene of a crime, a place of profound and personal violation. And then she saw him. Through the pristine glass of the incubator, she saw her son. He was so small, a tiny being wrapped in a blue blanket with a fine dusting of dark hair on his head. Wires and tubes connected him to monitors that beeped softly, but his little chest rose and fell in a steady, peaceful rhythm. He was perfect. He was real. Looking at him, a fierce, protective love surged through Olivia, so powerful it eclipsed the pain and the fear, if only for a moment. He was hers. Whatever had happened, whatever was happening, she had him. She pressed her hand to the glass, a barrier between them. "Hello, Miles." She whispered the name, coming to her unbidden, as if it had always been his. "I'm your mum." Tears streamed down her face, tears of joy, of sorrow, of a terrifying and uncertain future. She was a mother, and she was utterly, devastatingly alone. The space beside her where her husband should have been standing felt like a physical void, a cold, empty chasm that had just opened up and swallowed her life whole. By Wednesday afternoon, the disappearance of Noah Hayes and Chloe Mitchell had escalated from a patrol officer's report to a priority case file on the desk of Detective Frank Miller. Miller was a 20-year veteran of the force, a man with tired eyes and a mind that worked with the slow, grinding precision of a millstone. He'd seen enough of human behavior to be rarely surprised, but the initial details of this case pricked at his professional curiosity. People didn't just vanish from a hospital while their wife or sister was undergoing emergency surgery. Not unless something was very, very wrong. He started his day at St. Jude's walking the path Noah and Chloe had taken. He stood in the waiting room, imagining the scene. He timed the walk down the stairs and out to the parking garage. He obtained the security footage. The quality was grainy, as it always was, but it was clear enough. He watched the footage in a small, windowless office the hospital had provided. There they were. Noah Hayes, tall and blonde, his shoulders hunched with tension. Chloe Mitchell, dark-haired and petite, walking so close to him, their arms brushed. He saw them exit the waiting room at 10:14 a.m. He saw them emerge from the side stairwell into the parking garage at 10:17 a.m. He watched as the Ford Explorer pulled out of its spot, navigated the concrete ramps, and passed through the exit gate at 10:21 a.m. The timestamp glowed in the bottom corner of the screen, an irrefutable fact. They had left, and they had done so under their own power. This wasn't an abduction. This was a departure. Miller's next stop was Olivia Hayes's hospital room. He found her propped up in bed, looking pale and fragile, her parents flanking her like sentinels. He introduced himself, his voice gentle but firm. He wasn't there to offer platitudes. He was there to find facts. Mrs. Hayes, he began, pulling up a chair. I need to ask some difficult questions. Was there any trouble in your marriage? Any financial problems? Anything at all out of the ordinary, Olivia's father. Robert bristled. Detective, my son-in-law loved my daughter. They were happy. They were about to start a family. Miller held up a hand. I understand, sir. But in 90% of cases like this, the explanation is domestic. I have to explore it. He turned his gaze back to Olivia. Olivia hesitated, her mother's hand tightening on hers. The thought of voicing her suspicions felt like a betrayal, but the image of Noah and Chloe looking at each other in the hospital room was burned into her memory. Things were stressed, she admitted, her voice low. The pregnancy was hard. Noah was working a lot. My sister Chloe, she was staying with us to help. She stopped, unable to say more. She didn't have to. The way her voice faltered on Chloe's name was information in itself. Your sister Miller said, making a note. Were she and your husband close? Yes, Olivia whispered. She's my sister. He's my husband. We were all close. Miller knew a deflection when he heard one. He moved on. What about finances? Did your husband have access to large amounts of cash? Any recent windfalls? Olivia looked at her father. Robert answered for her. Noah's grandmother passed away about 6 months ago. She left him a substantial inheritance. I don't know the exact figure, but it was well over 6 figures. Miller's pen scratched across his notepad. Inheritance. A motive was beginning to form, ugly and cliché. A man with new money, a pretty sister-in-law and a pregnant wife about to undergo major surgery. It was a sordid triangle, and Miller had seen it before. He left the hospital with a clear objective: track the car and the money. He put out a bolo bee on the lookout for the dark blue Ford Explorer. He sent a request to the Tech Crimes Unit to try and ping the last known location of their phones, though he suspected they'd been turned off long ago. He also began the process of getting warrants for their bank and phone records. The ping from the phones came back first. Both had been powered off within 10 minutes of each other at approximately 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday. The last registered cell tower was near the on-ramp to Interstate 84, heading north, away from the city. They were running. The real break came late that afternoon. A call came in from the state police. A trooper on patrol responding to the bolo had found the Explorer. It was parked on a gravel service road, just off a secondary highway in Litchfield County, a rural, heavily wooded area nearly 80 miles north of St. Jude's. The location was remote, the kind of place you'd only be if you were intentionally trying to get lost. Detective Miller drove out to the scene himself. The Explorer was exactly where the trooper said it would be, tucked behind a curtain of dense foliage, barely visible from the main road. The area was silent, except for the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the wind. The car was locked. There were no immediate signs of struggle, no broken windows, no blood. It just looked abandoned. The forensics team arrived and got to work. They popped the lock and began a meticulous search of the vehicle's interior. Miller watched from a distance, his hands in his pockets. The car was clean, almost too clean. A half-empty bottle of water sat in the center console. A gas station receipt from a town 20 miles back was crumpled on the floor. In the glove compartment, they found the car's registration and a folded map of Connecticut state parks with a small circle drawn around a campground near the Massachusetts border. Then one of the techs called out, "Hey, detective, take a look at this." The tech was shining a small flashlight on the floor of the passenger side. Lying on the dark carpet, half hidden under the seat, was a single earring. It was a small silver feather, delicate and distinct. Miller had them bag it as evidence. He had a strong feeling it didn't belong to Olivia Hayes. It was small, but it felt significant. It was a piece of the puzzle, a tangible link to one of the people who had sat in this car before disappearing into the vast, silent woods. Standing on that lonely road as dusk began to settle over the trees, Miller felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. The empty car, the map, the solitary earring, it didn't feel like the scene of a romantic getaway. It felt more ominous. Noah and Chloe hadn't just run off. They had a plan. They had switched cars, or were meeting someone, or had simply vanished on foot into the thousands of acres of state forest that surrounded them. They had driven for 2 hours, abandoned their vehicle, and stepped out into the wilderness. The question was why. Were they escaping to a new life? Or was it possible they were escaping from something else entirely? Back in the sterile confines of her hospital room, Olivia existed in a state of suspended animation. Time was measured not in hours, but in the visits from nurses, the changing of her IV drip, and the precious, all too brief moments she was allowed to spend with Miles in the NICU. Her son was her anchor, the one solid thing in a world that had turned to liquid. Holding his tiny hand, she could almost believe that everything would one day be okay. But then she would return to her room, to the silence, and the questions, and the fragile peace would shatter. Her parents were a constant presence, their faces strained with the effort of holding their own grief at bay to support hers. They spoke in hopeful tones about Noah and Chloe being found, but their words rang hollow. Hope was a dwindling resource. On Friday morning, 3 days after the surgery, Detective Miller returned. He carried a small, clear plastic evidence bag in his hand. He greeted Olivia and her parents, his expression neutral, professional. He was not a man who brought good news. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, pulling the chair close to her bed, "I need you to look at something we found in your husband's car." He held up the bag. Inside, nestled on a bed of white cotton, was the small silver feather earring. Olivia stared at it. It was dainty, familiar. She had seen it before, glinting in the light as it dangled from... Her breath hitched. A memory surfaced sharp and clear, Chloe leaning over the kitchen counter a few weeks ago, laughing at something Noah had said. The silver feather had caught the light. Olivia had even complimented her on it. "They're new," Chloe had said with a pleased smile. "A little gift to myself." Olivia's eyes flickered from the earring to her mother's face. Susan Mitchell's expression had crumpled. She too recognized it. She had been with Chloe when she bought them. "That's..." Chloe's Susan whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. The confirmation landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. It was the tipping point, The last desperate tendril of denial to which Olivia had been clinging was severed. The vague, ugly suspicions hardened into an unbearable certainty. They hadn't been in an accident. They hadn't been abducted. They had left. Together. A raw, guttural sob escaped Olivia's lips. It was a sound of such profound betrayal that her father visibly flinched. The pain was physical, a hot knife twisting in her chest worse than the surgical incision. Noah, her husband, the man who had promised to love and protect her, had walked away from her at her most vulnerable moment. And he had done it with her own sister, the person who should have been her fiercest ally. Detective Miller gave them a moment, his gaze averted out of respect. When Olivia's sobs subsided into ragged, shuddering breaths, he spoke again, his voice flat and factual. "The earring confirms what our other findings suggest, Mrs. Hayes. We got the warrants for their financial and phone records this morning." He opened his notepad. "A month ago, your husband and your sister opened a joint savings account at a different bank from the one you share. Over the last 4 weeks, Noah Hayes made a series of transfers from his inheritance fund into that new account totaling over $200,000. On Monday, the day before your surgery, Chloe Mitchell withdrew $10,000 in cash from that account. Each word was a nail in the coffin of Olivia's marriage. This wasn't a spontaneous act. This was a plan, meticulous, calculated, cruel. They had been planning this for weeks, moving money, preparing their escape, all while smiling at her, comforting her, pretending to share in her excitement for the baby. "There's more," Miller continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "We recovered deleted text messages from their phones via the carrier's records. They've been having an affair for at least 8 months. Olivia closed her eyes, not wanting to hear, but unable to stop him. They started planning to leave about 2 months ago. They talked about moving to the Pacific Northwest Oregon, maybe. Starting a new life. Your medical situation seems to have accelerated their timeline." A message from Chloe to Noah sent last Sunday said, and I quote, "This is our chance. While she's in the hospital and recovering, we can be gone. It will be easier this way. A clean break." A clean break. The words were so clinical, so cold, as if they were talking about a business deal, not the demolition of a family. They had used her C-section, her pain, her recovery as a window of opportunity. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. "So they're not lost in the woods?" Robert asked, his voice rough with fury. "Unlikely," Miller said. "The abandoned car, the map, the remote location, that's classic misdirection. They wanted us to waste time and resources searching the forest. My guess is they had another vehicle stashed nearby, or a contact who picked them up. A car that can't be traced back to them. They're smart. They've covered their tracks well." The detective closed his notebook. The facts had been laid bare. The mystery of their disappearance was solved. All that remained was the agonizing human wreckage. After Miller left the hospital room, was filled with a new kind of silence. Not the silence of worried waiting, but the silence of mourning. Olivia felt strangely numb, as if she were floating outside her own body, watching a stranger's tragedy unfold. The woman in the bed was a victim, a cliché, the poor, pregnant wife, abandoned by her cheating husband. But then a wave of pure, white-hot rage burned through the numbness. How dare they? How dare they do this to her son? How dare they think they could just disappear and erase their existence, their responsibilities, their betrayal? She looked at her parents, their faces aged by sorrow in the span of 3 days. She thought of her son, Miles, sleeping peacefully in the NICU, oblivious to the fact that his father and his aunt had conspired to abandon him before he'd even taken his first breath. In that moment, something inside Olivia shifted. The fragile victim began to recede, and in her place, a woman she didn't recognize began to emerge. A woman forged in the fires of the deepest possible betrayal. They had wanted a clean break. They had left her for dead emotionally, but she wasn't dead, and she would not let them destroy her. "I want to see my son," she said, her voice quiet but steely. "And then I want you to call my lawyer." The story, when it broke, was a media firestorm. It had all the elements of a prime-time tragedy: a new mother, a newborn baby, a cheating husband, and a treacherous sister. "Betrayal at the bedside," one headline blared. "Husband vanishes with sister-in-law during C-section," screamed another. Noah and Chloe's smiling faces, taken from Olivia's own social media, were plastered across television screens and news websites. They were no longer just missing persons. They were fugitives' villains in a story that captured the nation's sympathy and outrage. For Olivia, this public exposure was a secondary violation. Strangers now knew the most intimate, painful details of her life. She was discharged from the hospital a few days later. A surreal departure without the husband who was supposed to be driving her and their new baby home. Instead, her father drove his grip on the steering wheel tense, while her mother sat in the back with Miles, who was finally cleared from the NICU. Walking into the home she had shared with Noah was agonizing. Every object was a memory now tainted. The armchair where he used to read, the kitchen where Chloe had cooked for her, the framed photos on the wall of the three of them, smiling, laughing, living a lie. The nursery, which they had painted a soft blue together, felt like a monument to a life that had never existed. With her parents' help, she began to dismantle it. She packed Noah's clothes into black garbage bags. She took down the photos. She had her father move Chloe's belongings from the guest room into boxes and store them in the garage. Erasing them from her physical space was a brutal but necessary act of survival. The days that followed were a blur of infant care and legal proceedings. Miles was a demanding and wonderful distraction. His needs were simple and absolute: feeding, changing, holding. In the dead of night, while rocking her crying son, Olivia would feel the full weight of her reality crash down on her. The grief was a physical presence, a heavy cloak she couldn't shrug off. But then Miles would look at her with his dark, unfocused eyes, and she would find a reason to keep breathing. Her lawyer, a sharp, empathetic woman named Sarah Chen, was a godsend. She handled the divorce filings, the freezing of assets, and the constant press inquiries with ruthless efficiency. Detective Miller called every few days with updates, which were mostly non-updates. "They've gone to ground," he told her over the phone 2 weeks after the disappearance. The cash withdrawal means they're not using credit cards. The second car, if there was one, was likely bought with cash under a fake name. They could be anywhere. The police had traced their probable route north toward the Canadian border. They'd released surveillance images from a gas station about 50 miles from where the Explorer was dumped. The footage showed a man who looked like Noah, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, paying for gas in cash. The woman with him stayed in the car, her face obscured. The car itself was a nondescript older model sedan, a beige Toyota Camry, impossible to trace without a license plate. Olivia tried to focus on the future. She made plans to sell the house. The memories were too toxic, and she couldn't afford the mortgage on her own. She would move in with her parents temporarily, a regression she hated, but a reality she had to accept. Her friends rallied around her, creating a protective circle. They brought meals, watched Miles, so she could nap, and listened for hours as she cycled through anger, sorrow, and disbelief. "How could I not have known?" she asked her best friend Kate one afternoon, as they sat on the living room floor, surrounded by baby toys. "I lived with them. I slept next to him." She's my sister. Were there signs? Was I just that blind? You weren't blind, Liv Kate, said her voice fierce. You were trusting. Because he was your husband, and she was your sister, and you're a good person who doesn't assume the worst of the people you love. This isn't on you. This is on them. They are broken people. The words helped, but the self-doubt lingered. She replayed the last few months in her mind, searching for clues she'd missed. The shared jokes, the late-night talks she'd overheard from her bedroom, Noah's sudden interest in hiking, and the outdoors an interest Chloe had always had. The puzzle pieces were all there. She had just refused to see the picture they formed. The manhunt dragged on. A month passed, then 6 weeks. The media attention faded, replaced by other tragedies, other scandals. The world moved on. But for Olivia, time remained frozen on that Tuesday morning. Then, on a crisp autumn evening in late October, the phone rang. It was Detective Miller. "We got a tip, Olivia," he said, and for the first time she heard a flicker of excitement in his weary voice. "A good one." The tip had come from a man named George Peterson, the owner of a small roadside motel called the Pine Cone Inn, in a sleepy town in northern Washington state, less than 20 miles from the Canadian border. George was an avid news watcher. He'd seen a repeat of a news story about the case on a national crime show. The faces of Noah and Chloe had stuck with him. "I've got a couple staying here checked in about a month ago," George had told the local sheriff. "Paid cash for a month up front. Calling themselves Mark and Jenny Peterson. Funny using my last name. The fella he matches the picture? He's thinner and he's grown a beard, but the eyes are the same. The woman, she's dyed her hair a mousy brown, but it's her. I'm sure of it." They had been living quietly, rarely leaving their room, always paying in cash. They were living the life they had planned, anonymous, together, free. But freedom was an illusion. Their new life was a cramped, musty motel room, their world shrunk to 4 walls, their every interaction shadowed by the fear of being discovered. "We're coordinating with the local authorities," Miller told Olivia. "We're going to apprehend them in the morning. It's over." Olivia sank into a chair, the phone still pressed to her ear. It was over. The 2 people who had wrought such destruction upon her life were about to be caught. She felt a surge of something, not joy, not relief, but a cold, hard sense of finality. The chase was ending. But for her, the real fallout was just beginning. She looked over at Miles, sleeping in his bassinet, and knew her fight was far from over. The Pine Cone Inn Room 12 was not a paradise. It was a purgatory of peeling wallpaper and the lingering scent of stale cigarette smoke. For 2 months, this cramped, musty space had been Noah and Chloe's entire world. The grand fantasy of a new life in the Pacific Northwest of scenic hikes, a charming little house, and a love affair legitimized by freedom had curdled into this sordid reality. Their days were spent in a state of low-grade paranoia, starting at every car that pulled into the gravel lot, speaking in hushed tones, prisoners of their own choices. The money which had once seemed like an infinite resource was dwindling at an alarming rate. It bled away on cash-only transactions, inflated weekly rates for the room, and the mundane expenses of an untethered existence. The excitement of their escape had long since faded, replaced by a bitter resentment that simmered between them. Noah stripped of his professional identity, and the admiration he craved grew sullen and irritable. He missed the simple respectability of his old life far more than he'd anticipated. Chloe, who had imagined herself as the heroine of a great romance, found she was merely a co-conspirator in a cheap, tawdry crime. The stolen glances and secret thrills of their affair couldn't survive the harsh, relentless daylight of 24/7 proximity. They had thrown away everything for each other, only to discover they didn't much like the person they were left with. On that crisp October morning, just after sunrise, Noah was staring out the grimy window when he saw the police cruisers pull quietly into the lot, their lights off. There was no screech of tires, no drama, just a calm, methodical surrounding of their room. The game was over. He turned from the window, his face ashen. Chloe was still in bed, curled under a thin blanket. She saw the look on his face and knew. All the fight, all the justification, all the carefully constructed lies they'd told each other dissolved in an instant. "Noah," she whispered, her voice trembling. He didn't answer. A firm, authoritative knock sounded at the door. "Sheriff's Department," opened the door, Mr. Hayes. The use of his real name was the final confirmation. He looked at Chloe, at the miserable little room, at the wreckage of their grand plan. There was nothing left to say. He walked to the door, turned the knob, and opened it to face the consequences. The phone call from Detective Miller came as Olivia was feeding Miles his morning bottle. The baby's small, warm body was a comfort against hers, a familiar weight in a world that still felt off-kilter. "We got them," Olivia Miller said, his voice, carrying the weary satisfaction of a long hunt, concluded. "In Washington State. They're in custody. It's over." Olivia's hand tightened on the bottle. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she had to sit down heavily on the sofa. It was over. The two spectres who had haunted her every waking moment and stalked her dreams were caught. She felt a surge of validation, a fierce, vindictive pulse of something that resembled triumph. They didn't get away with it. But the feeling was hollow, immediately followed by a profound and aching emptiness. Their capture didn't erase the betrayal. It didn't bring back her husband or her sister. It didn't unbreak her life. Later, she watched the news report with her parents. There they were on the screen, Noah and Chloe, their faces pale and stunned, as they were led in handcuffs toward separate police cars. He looked thin, bearded, a shadow of the handsome, confident man she had married. Chloe looked like a frightened child, her stylish bob replaced with mousy, neglected hair, her eyes wide with terror. Seeing them so diminished, so utterly defeated, brought Olivia no joy. It was just pathetic. A pathetic end to a pathetic affair. She felt a pang of pity, which she immediately hated herself for. Pity was an emotion they did not deserve from her. She turned off the television. The legal process began, and with it came a new level of family anguish. Her lawyer, Sarah Chen, explained the complexities. Noah was facing serious charges for grand larceny, essentially for stealing the marital portion of his inheritance and absconding with it. The restitution would be significant, but collecting it would be a long, arduous process. The most difficult conversations, however, were with her mother. Susan, heartbroken and adrift, tried to bridge the impossible chasm that had opened between her daughters. Chloe called from a payphone after she was released. Susan told Olivia one afternoon, her voice pleading. They were in Olivia's parents' kitchen, the air thick with unspoken grief. "She's a mess, Liv. She knows what she did was unforgivable. But she's your sister. She says Noah twisted everything, that she was so caught up in it, she couldn't see straight." Olivia continued to methodically fold a pile of baby clothes on the table, her movements precise and controlled. Did he hold a gun to her head on? Did he force her to open a secret bank account? Did he make her text him that my C-section was their chance for a clean break? Susan flinched at the cruelty of the words. No, of course not. But there is no but, Olivia said, her voice quiet but unyielding. She finally looked up, her eyes meeting her mother's. The sister I had would have protected me. She would have taken a bullet for me. That person, she gestured vaguely toward the west coast, is a stranger. A stranger who conspired with my husband to abandon me and my son. I have nothing to say to her. Not now. Not ever. The finality in her tone left no room for argument. Susan's shoulders slumped in defeat. She was mourning both her daughters, one lost to betrayal the other, to a grief so profound it had walled her off. Her husband Robert was less conflicted. His anger was a silent, simmering force in the house. He never spoke Chloe's name. For him, she had simply ceased to exist. A week later, Sarah Chen brought a thick envelope to Olivia during a meeting. "This came for you, forwarded from the DA's office." "It's from Noah." Olivia stared at the letter. His familiar, slanting handwriting was on the front. For a moment, she was tempted. A morbid curiosity compelled her to want to know his excuses, his justifications. What could he possibly say to explain the inexplicable? Perhaps reading his pathetic groveling would provide some sense of closure. She took the letter. She held the weight of it in her hands. It was the weight of 7 years of marriage, of shared dreams now shattered, of a love that had proven to be a catastrophic lie. She thought of him writing it in a jail cell, trying to spin a narrative where he wasn't the villain. And she realized she didn't care. His words were poison, and she had spent months purging that poison from her system. Without a word, she walked to the kitchen, turned on the gas stove, and held the corner of the envelope to the blue flame. She held it until the fire licked at her fingertips, then dropped the burning missive into the stainless steel sink. She watched as his words, his excuses, his entire existence in her life turned to black, curling ash. It was the cleanest break of all. Months passed. The seasons turned. The house was sold to a young, happy couple who were expecting their first child. Olivia felt a pang watching them, but no bitterness. She wished them well. She and Miles settled into a small but sunny apartment, a space with no ghosts. Life began to find a new, tentative rhythm. It was a rhythm defined by the small, wondrous milestones of her son. One spring afternoon, as Olivia was unpacking the last box of keepsakes, Miles, now almost a year old, pulled himself up for the first time. He gripped the edge of the coffee table, his little legs wobbly, a look of triumphant surprise on his face. He let out a delighted squeal. Olivia froze, tears springing to her eyes. She knelt on the floor in front of him, her heart swelling with a love so fierce it ached. This was it. This was the life that mattered. This tiny, determined boy, her beautiful son, was her future. The woman who had wept in the hospital bed felt like a different person. The betrayal had not destroyed her. It had reforged her. It had burned away her naivete, leaving behind a core of tempered steel. She was warier, sadder, but also stronger, more self-reliant, more appreciative of the true, steadfast love of her parents and friends. The scars were still there, a reminder of the life she had lost, but they no longer defined her. She held out her hands to her son. "Come on, sweet boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You can do it. Come to Mama." Miles let go of the table and took a single, wobbly step, his arms outstretched, before tumbling into her embrace. Olivia caught him, burying her face in his soft hair, breathing in his baby scent. He was her anchor, her purpose, her clean slate. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time it didn't feel terrifying. It felt like a beginning. The story of Olivia Hayes is a chilling reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those we hold closest. Her journey through unimaginable heartbreak, from the sterile fear of an operating room to the lonely strength of single motherhood is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. While the people who wronged her faced their own form of justice, the true story is in Olivia's fight to reclaim her life and build a future for her son, Miles. If her story of survival and strength resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others. Your engagement helps these important stories reach a wider audience. And if you want to hear more true stories of incredible resilience, shocking twists, and the complex realities of the human heart, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Thank you for listening.